Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Prince George's County Memorial Library System's virtual events. My name is Nicholas Brown. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Communication and Outreach. I'm so glad that you could join us tonight. We have a very, very special program in line for you, and we are co-presenting tonight's event with the Prince George's County Human Relations Commission. The Human Relations Commission is the county's human rights and civil rights education and enforcement agency. Is a very important agency and one of our strongest partners here at the library. We have many, many great programs that are co-presented between the two agencies. And we're very excited to have our latest awesome author joining us tonight for yet another library and HRC special. We have them sometimes 4 times a week. And tonight's very special guest is Hope Michelle Ayers. And I'm going to give you a bit about her bio in just a moment. But first, would like to introduce that our moderator this evening is Renee Battle-Brooks, who is the Executive Director of the Prince George's County Human Relations Commission. She's a background as an attorney working in the State's Attorney's Office and various other settings, is a great champion and leader for civil rights and equality and equity in our community, and great friend of the libraries as well. We also give a shout out to Kyla Hannington, HRC's Outreach Coordinator and Public Information Officer, for her role in making this event possible tonight. So real quick, I'm going to introduce Hope, and then you will see Hope and Renee appear on screen. Hope Michelle Ayers currently lives in Atlanta, Georgia, and Washington, D.C., and she works as an attorney and advisor for the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, but in her outside life is a writer, which is pretty fabulous. And we're very blessed here in the Washington, D.C. area to have many people who have creative careers as well as careers in public service. Her first novel, Gabriel's Balloon, is the focus of tonight's program, and she's also authored 2 collections of poetry, Love Defined and Acquaintances, along with a series of children's books entitled The Chelsea Tales. Hope is a graduate of Alabama State University and the University of Alabama. I think there's a rivalry there, right? So you can kind of root for both sides, which is probably convenient. And she is the CEO of Hope and Air Incorporated, and a lifelong supporter of the Boys and Girls Club of America, and active member of the Delta Sigma Theta sorority, the ASU National Alumni Association, and the Alabama State Bar. You can borrow Hope's book, Gabriel's Balloon, from PGCMLS. You can obtain it through our curbside service while we're in emergency operations right now. Just visit our website at pgcmls.info, and then click on the catalog link to make a reservation for the book. Chat with us on social media as we go. You can tag the library at PGCMLS and HRC at HRC PG County on Twitter, and then you can find us on other platforms as well. And without further ado, I'm going to welcome up Renee and hope you all enjoy the program. Thanks, everyone.
Hi, thanks, Nick. Hello.
Thank you, Nick.
Good.
Hello, Renee. I'm well. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you. I am thrilled that we finally made this work from our conversations pre-COVID.
Yeah, indeed.
So I'm going to hold your book up for everyone that's watching.
Thank you so much. I've got my copy here with me.
There we go. Gabriel's Balloon. It's an amazing story. And Hope, I have to tell you that when I turned to the last page, I started crying.
Oh.
Yep, I'm going to cry again if I look at the last page.
Well, if that's what happened on the last page, when I wrote the last page, I cried.
Oh.
And so we're in relationship there, and that just warms my heart. I don't know, I can't speak for every author, but I imagine that most people, especially when you're writing fiction, you want to take people to a place where it's beyond their status quo. And you want to bring them in, and you want to make them feel something, that otherwise they wouldn't be feeling if they hadn't read your passages. Yeah. So to hear you say that truly warms my heart. It is a dream come true to hear you say that.
Well, yes. So I invite you to read, for those who perhaps haven't had the opportunity to read your book yet, and for those who already have, I invite you to read some passages for us before I start asking you questions.
Well, thank you. And I thought about what I would read, and I selected just a couple of pages that I think will give those who haven't read the book a hint of the storyline without revealing too much of it. And then those who have read it will be reminded as to why I think the main character, Gabriel, is someone that we all can connect with, and someone that we all, on some level, in some shape, form, or fashion, can relate to. So with that said, I'll read from pages 19 to 21. And it's from the 3rd chapter of the book. And the title of that chapter is Lying and Lynching. And with that said, I'll start. That night was just the kind of night that would bring trouble and sorrow. The air was bitter cold, and a thick dampness burdened what was left of the late summer breeze. Everything was still, and the eerie quietness was interrupted only every now and again by the screech of an owl. The bird's hollow, piercing squawk was loud, sharp, and seemed to serve as an announcement of the tragedy yet to come. For at least an hour or so, no one inside the Loveman cabin had said a word. Instead, everyone sat quietly and preoccupied themselves with an occupation that might as well not have existed, for each mind was heavily weighed with worry. Rosalie Loveman looked to be darning the same sock for about the 5th time when she really was reciting the Lord's Prayer over and over, silently to herself. John Loveman was finishing his nightly Bible reading. The page detailing the perils of Job was nothing but a mere blur. Still, he stared for fear that if he lifted his eyes from the book, his swollen heart would burst and he would not be able to hold back his tears. David Loveman, a man known to avoid pretentiousness at all costs, simply sat in the wicker chair, rocking back and forth, wringing his hands until they were just about chapped and raw. No doubt he imagined the worst of scenarios. Some 20 years or so before, he himself had barely escaped a similar plight as the one they feared Benjamin might be facing. And so he sat, feeling more helpless than ever, waiting for the return of the nephew he loved as if he were his own child. Gabriel, the youngest member of the Loveman clan and the most anxious of all, sat halfway sprawled across the kitchen table, surrounded by books and work tablets, trying desperately to focus on his preparation for the next day's school session. A usual quick study, his anxiety for his big brother's arrival home disrupted his focus, and he could not concentrate. The queasiness he felt deep in the bottom of his chest overwhelmed his attention span. And so while the books were placed in front of him, he had captured little to nothing of what they had to offer him on this haunting evening. For all the same reasons, and then for unique and very special reasons, every member of the Loveman family longed for the exact same event. They all wanted the front door to swing open with just a little too much force, just as it had each night before, bearing Benjamin's entrance to their humble abode and closing out his ever so long workday. They all wanted to hear the beginning of a sweet love song or a soothing church hymn in the voice of a most glorious tenor, perfect in pitch, that carried over and across the fields of the plantation and down the path to their small cabin into the ears of his loving family members who all relied on a nightly song for their awareness of his whereabouts. If nothing else, the Loveman family wanted to see the hazy glimmer of a swinging lantern that could always be seen from the tiny window overlooking their front porch. The light always seemed to shine brighter and brighter as Benjamin made his way closer and closer to the home where he belonged, the cabin where his loving family sat night after night awaiting his arrival. That night, each member looked desperately for the light that many nights had brought the most welcome relief when the dark had arrived, the singing had stopped, but the door had yet to swing open. The light, the lantern that lit up the night, just as the one they awaited lit up their hearts and souls. This wanting, this wait was a routine the Lovemans endured night after night, especially during the planting season. An endurance that mostly went unmentioned, for such was the trade-off for Benjamin's love. As gut-wrenching and nerve-wracking as the wait always was, that night was the worst ever. Perhaps their fright was due to the stillness of the wind, perhaps the heaviness of the air that was particularly cold and harsh for a late summer's eve made them all the more uneasy. Perhaps it was the screeching, the continuous screeching of the owl. Perhaps, just perhaps, more than anything else, their fears were rooted in the fact that never before had there been this long a time between the song ending, the light shining brightly, and the door swinging open. After the second hour passed, the father did as fathers in his situation were trained to do. As he closed his Bible, John Loveman looked at his wife, whose head was hung so heavy with fear and worry that she could not return his gaze. I will go and get him and bring him home. I promise, he said gently. In a very bare whisper, Rosalie Loveman responded, 20 years, John Loveman, and you ain't never made a promise to me you couldn't keep. Don't start now. You go, she whispered, and she tilted her head to the side, tears streaming down past her chin, falling one after the other onto the sock that was lying in her lap. I'll stay here. I'll sit here and pray for him and for you, and I'll wait here, right here in this chair, until you come home. Thank you.
Ah, yes, yes, yes. So many themes that you're had. But first of all, talk to us about the inspiration.
You know, it is a variation of things. The book will, if I'm successful, will alert the reader to the calamity that was part of the life of a sharecropper. And it takes place in the era that we refer to historically as the Great Migration. And I think sometimes it is that era in our country that is overlooked and not mentioned within the context of what the life of a slave and descendants of slaves look like more immediate to the Emancipation Proclamation. And so I wanted to take the reader to that place, and I wanted them to see how closely, how very akin a day-to-day life of a sharecropper was to the day-and-day life of a slave. And I had this opportunity to showcase a character who developed from a piece of artwork. Gabriel was inspired initially by a piece of artwork that had a young man in the front of the frame walking away from three people who were watching him walk away. And their faces contained emotions that were bitter and sweet. And what I thought would be a simple story about a coming of age ended up being a story that parallels some of the, unfortunately, some of the tragedies that we've had to address, protest, and absorb and heal from, even in recent years. I don't want to give away too much for those who haven't read it, but at the end of the day, at the close of the book, I hope that readers walk away, even having experienced some sadness within the book, with a sense of optimism and a sense of equity and a sense of, for lack of a word that will come to mind that won't be a pun, but with a sense of hope. And
Right.
so that's the inspiration. I think it's my love song to the survival of our people. And also it's my cry to the world that we unify and we come together better going forward.
Yeah, I too was struck by the parallels from the book and what we're living today, most definitely. Just a quick question, just out of curiosity, from the time that you saw this artwork to the first penning of the book, how long was that?
So I saw the artwork for the first time in either late 99, early 2000, and I wrote the end, those two words, in 2018.
Wow.
Initially, I was only writing the book as an escape from lawyer life, and you understand that. You know, I never wanted to be a stuffy attorney or somebody who could only have a conversation about the latest case law or what happened at trial. I wanted to do my work and be, you know, committed to my job. And I love being a lawyer, but I also love it when people say, oh, you don't act like a lawyer. And I think that being a writer has given me that balance. And so it was a hobby for years. And then I had a friend challenge me to become more serious about it and to publish it. And after a close call in 2007, I had a close call. I was really sick in 2007. And I thought, if something happened to me, what would I have unfinished? And from that time on, I would take vacations and spare time and nights and work on the book.
Beautiful, beautiful. Just in case
I
you
never imagined that it would be published in a time where it would be relevant. Like
Right.
I didn't imagine the parallels, and that breaks my heart that the parallels exist.
Well, yes, and it kind of speaks to the bigger history of our country and the parallels that keep repeating themselves in a sense.
Yes.
In case you didn't see, your line sisters are all watching. It's a little bit of, it was one that popped up before while you were reading. So
they're the most remarkable women in the world. They are my stronghold. They are just, I have a support system that just touches my heart. I love y'all.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about the parallels, the overarching theme, and sort of what struck me. The first parallel I wanted to talk about was on page 24, you know, when you talk about this, this sense of the characters in the story, not of acceptance, but realization that, quote, Black boys die young. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Okay, I was trying to do it without getting emotional. It was
and it's okay if you do.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Again, like I said, I started working on this book in the year 2000. It was 18 years in the making, and I would put it down. You know, there were some gaps in time when I wasn't working on it, but one year in particular, it was in the throes of the Trayvon Martin matter, and the trial had begun, and I was lying in my bed, and I kept the news on. You know, I would go to sleep with the TV on. And I woke up to the trial being aired, and Trayvon Martin's mother was on the stand, and the prosecutor was asking her very preliminary questions about herself, her biographical information, and about her family. And he asked her, do you have children? And of course, she responded in the affirmative. And then he asked specifically, what are your children's names? And she gave the name of her oldest son. And then he said, and do you have another son? And she said, I had another son. And he said, what was his name? And she said, his name was Trayvon Benjamin Martin. And I sat straight up in my bed because I had named the character Benjamin years before. And I cried. And I thought about page 24. I thought about that passage where, and I think it's germane to the discussion about what we tell our children if you're stopped by the police, or if you find yourself in a situation where you're outnumbered and you're with some people who apparently are going to seek to do you harm or wish you harm because of the color of your skin, and the reality of the danger that a skin tone can assign to your walk of life. And when who is actually Benjamin's grandfather is saying to his son at the most, what's supposed to be the most joyous occasion, the first child, and he's love him. You know, this is my advice to you, father to son, love him, you know, and accept and celebrate everything about him, and keep him close to you while you can, because Black boys die young.
Yeah, that's deep, and it struck me again.
Mm-hmm. The likelihood, of course, was more prominent and more frequent during that time, but it just feels too similar of an age. I'm so uncomfortable with how relevant the storyline is now.
Right.
And I've asked God about that, and you know, He says you can ask me all the questions you want. but that doesn't mean you get the answers.
Indeed, indeed.
Yes.
Again, parallels, and all won't be in numerical order by the book, but on page 26,
Okay, sure.
What struck me again about the phrase, those that keep silent and do nothing, are as culpable, basically. And this was talking about, I don't want to give it away, but a horrible incident that happened. Mm-hmm. And the parallel is similar to sort of the struggle now. Those that are silent perhaps are complicit. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, that's a Dr. King influence. He taught us that it would be the silence of our friends that would lend to our peril. And I can't remember the quote exactly, but I remember his emphasis on the need for those who do not agree and who do not participate in acts that are rooted in hatred or unfairness or bias and prejudice. If your heart's not situated like that, then you've got to become what we refer to commonly now as an ally. I don't know if I'm comfortable with that word. I just want everybody to be who they are. I don't see my friends who are in the fight that don't look like me as allies. I just see them for who they are, just human beings who will not tolerate that. But, we are living in times, and they were living in times in the storyline where silence can actually be deadly. And I think that these past couple of years have really flushed that out and put it in our face. I've had conversations that were tough, but necessary. And there's another, point in the book where there's a conversation between a Black woman and a white woman. And they are two of my favorite people in the world, although they're fictional. They remind me of me and some of my friends and our commitment to being truthful with one another and to holding one another accountable to our humanity. And so I think that as scary as it is, and I myself, Renee, have had to become more open-minded about the fact that many of my friends have grown up in environments where it wasn't a safe place for them to be different in their commitment to fairness and in their appreciation for the humanity of anyone else, no matter what they look like or who they love or, what their background is. And so I've learned to be patient in my encouragement, in my requirement that you take a stand. And I think we've got a lot more hand holding to do, but I think we've got a lot more challenging to do when it comes to, you've got to push past the fear. It will be there. Fear is a part of life, but we can take fear and we can be fueled by it for the good, or we can be stifled by it, and the bad, the horrible will continue to prevail. So
true. Yeah. I was struck, I agree with you that what I took from this book was hope. And so without a play on words, that, part of what you hope to impart was hope. And it was hope and resilience and joy in life.
Oh, good.
Right. And so I was struck, and I'll just read it. It's on page 104 because it was beautiful. And this is Rosalie, for those who haven't read. This is the mother of Gabriel. And she said, basically, I learned how to be joyful, even if I couldn't be happy. Can you talk a little bit about sort of what that looks like and what that means? And especially now, as we're in the middle of COVID, as we're in the middle of COVID fatigue, as we are going into, we've already started the holiday season that for some is such a depressing and isolating time. So we've already been isolated, and now we're going into the season where celebration in our culture means with family and friends. And if you don't have that, right, and high suicide rate, can you talk to us about this, learning how to be joyful, even if you can't be happy? What does that mean?
Thank you for that question. It's going to give me an opportunity to do something that is just in my heart to do. I was taught by many in my family about the difference between joy and hope. Joy and happiness. And one of my teachers was my late uncle, Joe Homer Cater, who was a pastor and a community servant. And we lost him in June to COVID-19.
Oh, sorry.
And today is his wedding anniversary.
Oh.
And so I just want to just say to my family that, I love you and thank you for your resilience and for your strength and for your faith. And I think I'll tell you about something that he would say in his sermons every now and again. And he had one particular sermon about stay in line. And what that translated to me is that even when there's calamity or there's sorrow or there is, like we're facing now, strife, a pandemic, even when there are all these horrors, keep your faith if you are a spiritual person. If you're not a spiritual person, whatever grounds you, hold tight to that which centers you. And that is the source, in my opinion, of your joy. The ability to know that even though what is happening is beyond my control, I can choose to withstand, to hold firm, and to look forward to the time beyond the immediate matter. And I think that's my definition of joy. And I can be optimistic because we've been through perils before, maybe not like this, but we all can look back in our memory. We all can take some time to be reflective, and we can remember when we were uncomfortable for whatever reason, or we were sad, or we were afraid, or we were sick. And we can hasten back to that memory and be mindful that this moment too is one day going to be a memory. Yeah. And so to keep the faith and, to be optimistic, to me, that's the definition of being joyful. And also, usually when you're in the midst of peril, if you will just reach out to someone else who needs help or who needs encouragement and just give what you don't think you have, I think that triggers joy. And I think it rejuvenates joy. And I think happiness is a choice. When we got an opportunity, we can choose to be happy because something has happened or something has been given or something has been shared. But I think we can always be joyful, even in the worst of times.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. And I want to take this moment for anybody that's listening, but for all of us, myself included, that during this season, we need to be intentional about reaching out to those who may be isolated, reaching out to those who we know struggle sometimes with either mental health or with depression or with sadness overall, that we can use this as an opportunity, to choose happiness, and that joy is there, and we have
Rosalie is my favorite character, by the way. She's my favorite character.
She is. Well, tell us why. Why is she your favorite character?
Because she's everywhere. She's in Georgia right now. She raised me in Alabama. She's, in DC, accepting appointments. She's, in the kitchen, making sure her family is fed. And she's my mother. She's my aunt. She's my friends. She's my mentor. She's my spiritual counselor. She's my cousin. She's my best friend. Rosalie, I just see her in just about every woman that I'm blessed to know. I see her in you, Renee. I see her in Kyla. Those women, and especially those women this past year, and who for the past few years, I noticed that my favorite professor, Professor Morgan, was one of my law school professors, and she's a champion for human rights. She's on, and my cousin Tracy is on, and I'm just so grateful. They are my Rosalies. When you can see yourself as the person responsible for the better happening, right? So Rosalies aren't satisfied with good. They go for the better. And when they get the better, they're not satisfied. They go for the best. And in that passage, she is determined to leave no stone unturned to make sure that the best outcome for her son is developed. And so thank you for highlighting her. She is I probably spent more time with her mentally than I did any other character.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah. You know, you talk about the character of Gabriel, you know, that it was your father's grin and your father's brilliance and the capturing and filling you with the joy of the English language, the inspiration. But tell us a little bit more about the character Gabriel and how it came to you. Not through the art, but how, you know, the development.
Because I think that there's a little bit of Gabriel in all of us. I think that, you know, the difference is some people are able to cultivate that special thing about themselves a little bit more than others. And then some, when you mention my dad, I can't but imagine who that man would have been but for the challenges of racism. I'm from Alabama. I grew up in a small town in Alabama. Well, big town. It might call itself now a small city, but it's a big town and I love it. But it was polarized racially. And my father was like the first foreman at his plant, and he worked a blue collar job, but he was brilliant and a master of the English language. I was reading books by 4. And by the time I was in first grade, it was well understood by my educators and my family that I had a love affair with books, and I owe that to him. But Gabriel's brilliance and Gabriel's ability to read something once and hear something once and commit it to memory just about is a little bit of me in my younger days. I'm not so good at it as much, but my friends know me for someone who can see and hear and capture. But I wanted to make it exceptional. And I wanted to impose for him an exceptional ability to do that. And I also wanted to demonstrate, especially to the youthful mind, to not be afraid of yourself. It can be overwhelming when you're talented and when other people are horning in on that, like, oh, he's so special. And you might feel overwhelmed or even burdened by what really is your gift and your talent. And so I wanted to take especially a young mind on a walk of, I don't know, and to let them know that that is healthy and human. And so Gabriel to me demonstrates just the humanity that we all embody and the possibilities that your talents and your gifts can create as long as you learn how to navigate through life's challenges that are external and then those emotions that are internal that sometimes get in our way. So I had a job to do with Gabriel. I had to demonstrate the external, calamity, the external trials, and I had to also open him up to the reader so that they could understand why those factors were so prevalent and so impactful. And I wanted to keep it plain and simple. If Gabriel were a white man or a white young man in his time, the big question hanging over his head wouldn't even exist. And I have some friends who have told me that taught them. And so, Gabriel to me is an opportunity to learn more about yourself and to learn more about others. That's what he represents. He represents opportunity to me.
And you did a beautiful job of sort of explaining who he was. And I loved his humbleness, his giving nature, even a master of few words. And yeah. I loved the themes, even though they were difficult, grief and how you handled that. Can you talk a little bit about how that developed? Because it's a thread that is woven throughout, but yet, as I said, there's still joy and hope, and you leave with this feeling. But grief is very prevalent and real.
It is. And, as I was writing the book, one of my, curiosities was, would it be too heavy? Would it be too sad a book? And here's what I'm coming to understand. I'm not in my full understanding of it, but I think the reason why grief is one of the prevailing themes in the book is because it's universal. I don't care if you're in Bangkok. I don't care if you're in Tokyo. I don't care if you're in Jackson, Mississippi, or New York City. I don't care where you are, London. I don't care where you are. Every human has experienced loss or will experience loss. It's the one thing that if I know how horrible it feels when I lose someone, and if part of my humanity is not wanting anyone to feel horrible or sad, then maybe that will govern my actions towards other people. Like, so we've got to find the common thread from me to you. And grief, unfortunately, is one of them. But I know in my own personal experience, I've learned to embrace the phases of grief. And I've learned to appreciate that it is a healthy part of life to grieve. And that once you're able to better understand and appreciate that process, then you can intensify your ability to be joyful, right? You can cultivate a heart and mind that although there's going to be sadness in life, I know that that's a part of life, but it also will produce an opportunity for joy, for gratitude, for thankfulness. And so I think Rosalie's character does that. I think also her husband, John, because they grieve so differently.
Yes.
And that was another thing, appreciating that how you grieve is different from how I grieve, but the grief or the gravity of it is the same. So we can appreciate how one another feels. That was the most important thing to me when it came to writing, about grief or writing through a character's grief.
You also captured Martha's grief,
Mm-hmm.
in a very creative way. Yeah. Yeah.
She loved him with enthusiasm from the time she first laid eyes on him. And I think that was another opportunity to say to white people, to Black people, to brown people, to, that, there's a soulful connection awaiting you if you will not allow differences to block them. There's a soulful, every encounter with another human being is an opportunity for a soulful connection. Don't miss that. I'm sorry, my earpiece dropped.
That's okay.
Don't miss out on that because of a bias or prejudice or a shortcoming on your part, or even insecurity. Reach past it and embrace what is due to you by the nature of the encounter. You don't know what another person has to offer your life or give you, even if it's a momentary exchange.
Yes. And Martha, is a minor character, but a pivotal character. And as I reflect on her, I mean, she is grieving other things that happen in her childhood to friends. She's also doing penance, and there's also love in there. And so this theme about love and acceptance, love and what you're willing to do for it, give up for it, suffer for it, love and choices and consequences. All of these things are so relevant, as you said, for everyone, and it is a commonality. I wanted to ask you why you picked the hymn that you picked.
I grew up, very much what they call a church kid.
Yeah.
And I have some favorites.
Yes.
But that hymn is, of hymns, my all-time favorite. Because it is a narrative, the songwriter is speaking in the first person, which to me is always just a showcase of vulnerability, right? It is so brave. And my own personal mantra, and what I often hashtag on a blog or a post, is hashtag love is an action word, and love is what matters most. And so the idea that in a time when they didn't have much to look forward to, that there would be singing, as there always has been, in our lineage and in our community, and there would be a showcase of talent between the dad and the son, and that they would routinely sing this song that everybody would look forward to hearing. It had to be a song in my mind that the reader would be able to appreciate, even if they weren't familiar with it, that the words would have to speak to my intention with regard to love being that lifter,
Yeah.
and that support that every human being needs. And so that's why that song.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it was great. Absolutely beautiful. So Robert.
We got to talk about Robert.
We do.
have to.
Yeah. So let's talk about him.
Okay. Let's talk about Robert Peterson.
Yeah. I have my suspicions or educated guess as to, the compilation of this character, but tell me how you derived his characteristics, how you chose very particular things.
He is a collaboration. He is a culmination, and it's a co-op of, personal experiences, and then, more public figures. And also, I had to imagine the mindset of a racist, right? And I also had to answer the call personally to see his humanity. And I think that as hard as that is, especially when you've been on the receiving end of such antics and such hate-filled speech or, behavior, how do you humanize this person who just bears a lot of hatred in his heart? And I had to take the reader back to when it happened for him and why, right? Like, what drives that kind of thought? What is the catalyst for someone who's willing to hurt or harm or wish hurt or harm upon another human being just because of who they are, how they look? Like, how does that happen? And Robert Peterson is probably the most insecure person I've encountered in my fictional arena. And all writers have a place that we go to and we create characters, but he's just a walking ball of fear. Yeah. He's so afraid. He's so afraid of not being loved that he's given up on being loved, and he's come to shrink in the presence of love. And because he refuses to remain small, he stands himself up in hatred. And he stands himself up in bullying and in behavior that makes him feel strong, but signifies a weakness of a heart and mind that many people suffer from. And it is a suffering on their part. One of my favorite human beings is Toni Morrison. And in an interview with Charlie Rose, she said, take away, your racism, and what will you have? Who are you? Who are you without it? And I think, as much as I appreciated her taking that stance, and oh my gosh, she was so heroic. She was just brilliant. But it led me to think, well, once they answer that question, if they ever can answer it, then who's going to help them? Because they will need help.
Indeed.
And can you love someone who's unlovable?
And can you reach somebody that is in that space?
I won't give away, his ultimate, stance. But I will say to you, because you've read the book, I struggled with which way he would go. I struggled with it. And in the end, I decided to be realistic.
Yeah. It left me wondering, and that leads me to a question I was going to ask last, but I'm going to ask now because it lends itself. Is there another book? Because I'm dying to know what happened to John and Rosalie. I want to know how David fared. I want to know about Hannah. I want to know whether Martha.
Isn't she a jewel? She was my beautiful surprise. I don't even know where
Yes.
she came from.
Yes,
It was a summer that I spent with Hannah, and I call her my beautiful surprise. But
yes.
you have the same questions that fortunately I have, and so yes, there is, and in my heart and in my mind, and also pen to paper, Gabriel's Balloon is a trilogy.
Excellent.
It is a trilogy. It's a 3-part. And so I am now working on the second book.
Oh, good.
I have it on spiritual authority that it's not going to take 18 years to get the other 2 out, now that we've gotten the first one pushed out, and that's given birth and it's in the hands. I now, because of how the characters came to life, I know where they're going to some extent. There'll always be surprises. Writers will tell you things happen that we didn't expect to happen. Yeah. But for the most part, I do have the overall walk of Gabriel and ultimately the journeys that he and the other characters take throughout life.
Because I want to know what happened to Gabriel and Ella's life. I want to know whether there's redemption for Robert.
Oh, wow. I can't wait to have the conversation with you that answers those questions.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's see. There are a couple of questions that are coming in, more than a couple, but let's see.
Great.
Let's see. This is from Dee Dee K. Hope, how long did it take you to do the research to capture the time period?
I have to credit, my upbringing and my education at home. My mom still is living and is feisty as ever. And she and my dad, they were community servants and activists. And, from the onset of, like I said, I started reading very early as a child. And we had comic books that were not necessarily funny because they were Black history comic books. And so my first introduction to that era was through, comic books and through, and at church, we would have Black history lessons, and we didn't always wait until February. And then I am, as Nick mentioned, I am an alumni of the Alabama State University, which is a historically Black college, a historically Black university that's situated in Montgomery, Alabama, and was oftentimes the hub for activity that led to the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. So many soldiers were incubated there at my alma mater. And he said that my alma mater and my law school were rivals, but that's not quite it. I get why he was saying that, but University of Alabama and Auburn are rivals. Alabama State and Alabama A&M University, another historically Black college and university that was a stone's throw from my house, we're actually rivals. And we're only rivals, I think, just a couple of times a year. Other than that, we're family. But really, the studies and the delve into African-American humanities, as an extracurricular activity, K through 12, and then with more focus in undergrad, and just, again, my love affair of books. DK, thank you for that question. And if you want to know the literary influence that really taught me a lot about that era, the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman by Ernest Goins was one of. I'll read it over the Christmas holidays again. I can't tell you how many times I've read it. But I really just have to give him credit for teaching his readers so much about that era. So, I've got, my influences and those who have graciously put pen to paper and helped this little reader and this little writer out. So I would say that book was a strong influence and a resource, but also just general knowledge from studies.
So, it's kind of about what you're talking about now, and another thread woven in your book is about sort of the importance of education. And I don't know if that's a theme that you wanted us to pick up and take, or whether that's just a given, but talk to us a little bit about that.
It's the one thing that once you have it, no one can take it from you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for that reason, I think that's one of the main reasons why it was such a resound effort by those that were empowered to negate education of Black minds, because knowledge is power. It is empowering. It is, and it's not contained to classrooms, right? I get that, and I understand that, and I always want to be open to learning from whomever, however. But to be able to embark upon a course of studies, absorb the information to the point where you can apply it to a day-to-day skill or talent or training is something that everyone has a right to accomplish. And in this country, especially, it's the most sophisticated in thought, right? The evolution of education in this country is remarkable. And that it is continues to be denied from an equitable standpoint is something that we've got to be relentless about. And my parents emphasized education, my grandparents emphasized education, and we were supported when it came to educational endeavors. And can I just say that I wanted the Loveman family to be one of the families, although literary, although fictional. I wanted the readers, no matter race, color, creed, I wanted them to see what love looked like in a family.
Yeah.
There's no strife between the family members, if you notice.
Exactly.
They love each other. And because I think that sometimes Black lives don't matter as much to some people because they don't imagine that we love each other just like other families love their families. That, yeah, we may be different. Yeah, our culture is, fascinating, and it may be off-putting to some, but don't ever forget or don't ever deny that we love our children. We love our parents. We love our families like you love yours. And so if you wouldn't want someone to hurt your family member, don't hurt mine.
Yeah. And was the name intentional, their surname, Loveman?
Yeah.
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 Yeah. So,
and if you think real hard, so is Robert Peterson's last name.
yeah. Okay.
We'll talk about it off screen.
Okay. Yes, definitely. When we're done, we'll go back to the
that will reveal itself. It does a little bit in this book, but I think it will reveal itself more in part 2.
Okay. So, this whole juxtaposition between good and evil and how it coexists, and it coexists today in our life, right? From a religious, theological standpoint, without going too deep. I mean, that struggle, good, evil. That's theological.
This angel versus that, yeah,
right. Every day for all of us. But talk to us about how you developed those, because there were some very clear examples. There were others that were subtle but powerful. So, how does a writer go about developing that and imparting that without,
right, without it being, too much, right? I think that's probably one of the themes that I just relied on personal experience. Yeah. We all make good decisions and we all make bad decisions. Yeah. We all, perform good acts and we all perform bad acts. And the distinguishing energy is choice. Yes. What do you choose to do?
That's right.
And some days I do so much better than others. But on the days when I don't do as well as I should have or wish that I had, I hope that those happen so that when someone else makes a decision that's even more impactful but negative, or someone does something that's even more intensive and more harmful, that it will trigger my compassion for that person.
Yes.
There's a teaching about an African village a village in a country where when someone in that village does something wrong, the rest of the villagers surround that person, rush them down to the water side, and encircle that person, and they start to shout at them as loud as they can everything good that they can think about them, everything good that they can remember about them, everything good that that person has done. And for me, that's like, because when you are wrong, you know it. And that's probably when you need to be loved the most. Yeah. So again, the choice of good versus evil hinges a lot on how loved you feel.
Yeah, yes, it is so true and so relevant today. I see that we are out of time. But
I've enjoyed it. I'm so grateful. Thank you for everyone who tuned in, everyone that knows me and loves me. You all are the best. And for those who aren't familiar with the book, it's available on my website. And there's no question that's wrong. And I've got the thickest of skin for critique and commentary. And I'm looking forward to gaining, more friends and supporters as I continue the trilogy. Renee, Kyla, Nick, and to the library system and to the Human Relations Commission, heart of gratitude I will carry forward from this day on. Thank you so much, my friend.
Oh, absolutely. The title of the book, when you find how it's developed, you won't ever forget, and it'll be a life lesson. It'll be a life lesson.
I hope so.
Yes. So don't go away, Hope. I'm just going to give a few closing remarks here.
Sure.
Again, we want to thank everyone that joined us tonight with Hope Ayers and her book, Gabriel's Balloon. I encourage everyone to go buy it. If you can't buy it, then check it out from your library. Check it out from Prince George's County Memorial Library System. You don't have to live in the county, P.S., during COVID, to have a virtual library card. So
I have mine.
There we go. You can access the library here in Prince George's County, Maryland. So thank you, Hope, for the time that you took to spend with us, to talk to us, to share. We didn't give anything about the book, the plot away. So it really is something for everyone to read.
Thank you so much.
Yes. And I want to thank Nick, the COO of the library, who gave the opening remarks. And I want to thank the library for their continued partnership with us. I love our events. I love our partnership. We want to also, it's been running across, but if you'd like to learn more about Hope Ayers and Gabriel's Balloon, check out her website at hopeandaircreations.com. That's AIR.com.
Thank you.
Just a short commercial for a couple of upcoming events. Next week, we have on December 8th, William G. Thomas III, his new book, A Question of Freedom. It outlines a fascinating narrative about the legal battles against slavery undertaken by families right here in Prince George's County. So you have to tune in to learn about Prince George's County and history we didn't know, history that impacts our nation and freedom and what happened. So please tune in on the 8th. William G. Thomas III, his book just dropped on November 24th. I'm
looking forward to that.
Yes, absolutely. You can find us on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, live stream. We are also partnering with the library on December 10th as we welcome Jennifer DeLeon in conversation about her novel, Don't Ask Me Where I'm From. And there are many more events that you can learn about that we have coming up. So please come back. Please check out PGCMLS, that's Prince George's County Memorial Library System.info/events. And I'm sure that's running across the screen now. So thank you, Hope. Thank you, everyone that came. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Kyla. And until
Happy holidays to you all.
Safe. And so we're going to say goodbye to everyone, but Hope, I'm meeting you in the green room. So thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.